And we are live. Welcome back, everyone, to another live networking event here on the 17th floor, 17thfloor.com. As a reminder, this community is focused on the growing practice of human capital management, which gathers HR, accounting, and payroll professionals together for peer-to-peer engagement, education, and mentorship. We do this every 2 weeks, hosting this live networking chat. And we like to always bring in industry guests. Sometimes they're for our members, sometimes they're special guests to act as experts where we can chat about our experiences in uplifting our businesses by elevating the well-being of our employees. My name is Sam Fiorella. I'm one of the community managers here on the 17th floor management team. And I'll be acting as your moderator for today's chat. And today, we are talking about corporate culture, something that has taken on a completely new meaning, especially in light of the pandemic, this online hybrid work culture, communicating through Zoom and all the rest of it. So it is very more so, I think, today than ever before. It is one of the business tactics and practices that every manager really needs to be up to date on. And so we've asked the co-CEOs of Avanti, David Owen, Cord, and Amin, did I say that right? Lalani?
Right.
I thought I had that right, and I questioned myself for some reason. So welcome, guys. David, I'll do a quick introduction. In 2018, David was ready to leverage his experience in finance and operations with Credit Suisse's technology group, Onyx, and others to focus on building this new company. Having recently returned from those work environments abroad, he got together with Amin and decided to start Avanti. As co-CEO, David's focus is on client experience, which I think is important to understand for the context of today's conversation, which is delivered through Avanti's client support, client implementation, and success teams. His co-CEO, Amin, lifelong entrepreneur and investor, led the acquisition of Avanti back in September of 2016. These guys started working together here. Along with David, he has helped to shape the culture and build the team that brings Avanti's powerful people management tools and hundreds of thousands of employees across Canada together. So I thought it would be perfect for these two to kind of talk about what they're doing in this evolving space and their personal experiences. For those of you listening live, feel free to ask any questions or comment. If you're on LinkedIn Live or YouTube Live, throw in your questions in the chat or comments, and we'll try and get to them throughout this conversation. For those of you who are watching this on playback or potentially listening to it on our podcast, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below, and one of our mentors, one of our community members, or somebody from Avanti, I'm sure will be able to see it and respond to you there. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Right. Yeah, thanks, Sam.
I think it's important to start with the basics, guys, because I think that everybody sees company culture as something different. How would you define company culture? What is a company culture?
Yeah, why don't I'll share my spin. It's a fun topic, I think, for both Amin and I. We spend a ton of time speaking about the subject, and I think part of the reason it is so fascinating and engaging and multifaceted is it's a bit of an intangible. You might ask 10 different people to define culture and receive different versions of how they interpret that. I think in my mind, culture is almost the living work in progress, unspoken behaviors in an organization. They are, when no one's watching, when no one's instructing, how do you act? How do you operate? What are the things you aspire to? Who are the role models? Those are elements that are defined by a culture. And it is a living, breathing thing. You have to appreciate that each change day to day, whether that's a new team member, a team member departing, how a person wakes up in the morning, all of these play a role in what that culture is and how it evolves over time. And obviously we play an important role in that, I think, as leaders in the organization and as kind of stewards of the culture, but it's also to a certain extent its own organism, for maybe lack of a better word. And that's kind of how I think about it. And I know we'll get into just some of the specifics, but yeah, that's the highest level how I discuss it.
Yeah. Maybe one thing I'll just add to that is like, culture is sort of the outcome. It's the collective behaviors of all the people in the organization. I think as an organization, you can put in place sort of frameworks, things like core values, which I know we'll discuss, and other sort of programmatic elements in how you manage your people to help entrench, the culture you're trying to build and encourage consistency in that behavior sort of across the company. But as Dave mentioned, it's very much a work in progress, something that evolves and is not something you're in complete control of. And so, how thoughtful and intentional you are about the programs you design and deliver to support that is obviously really important as a business leader.
I'm going to play a little devil's advocate here because I've worked with a number of companies, ran a number of my own companies as I do today, and you guys have come from different organizations, large and small. How many of us talk about this? How many companies just talk about this? Everything that you said, all those beautiful words, but it's all very conceptual. How much lip service are we paying to this for the most part?
It's funny. I think, so I think whether you like it or not, you have a culture. To me, that's almost there's no debate. It's a factual statement. Whether you have the culture you want or the culture you speak to, those I think is where you get into a variance of, I'll call it success or failures, depending on the organization. I think every organization has a culture. Many organizations strive to create that culture to be something special, something, folks aspire to live up to, great values. I think your ability to actually effectuate that and be successful in kind of creating a culture that is closely aligned with those desired values and behaviors, that's where I think you see a very broad spectrum of success. And I think it's because it's hard. We alluded to this earlier. It's not a point in time. It's ever evolving. It's ever changing. That makes it complicated and nuanced. And so to kind of speak directly, I think no matter what, you kind of want to accept you have a culture. And Amin used these words before, but you want to be intentional and deliberate about facilitating and trying to evolve your culture, ideally to those espoused values we all hear about and are often marketed. And I think, we'll talk a little bit about some of the ways I think you can do that well and maybe not do that well. But I think starting with the basis of no matter what, you have a culture, whether you like it or not, and how you kind of operate within that is up to you.
Yeah. And it starts very much from the hiring process and who's in your organization. I think that there's in order to not pay lip service to it, you kind of have to be intentional and deliberate, right? So everyone has their own set of values. So if you're trying to entrench a specific set of core values, you need to screen for that when you hire someone, right? Do they share some of those core values? Will they express some of that and exhibit some of that in their behaviors? And then, who you promote and elevate in the organization as a role model, that's who people will look to. That's who will, they will emulate their behaviors. So, the programs that support those things need to be intentional and intersectional with your culture and your design there, right? And so the worst thing you can do in my mind is paint a great picture of what your culture is, hire someone, and then they experience something totally different, right? And I think that's what you're talking about, Tim. That's the lip service piece of like, have this great culture, here are our values. So it's not followed with the intentional and deliberate practice of entrenching that into your organization. You won't be able to build people that support on and build upon the culture you're trying to build, right? You'll just hire anyone and it'll go in all sorts of different directions. And as Dave said, the culture exists, whether you like it or not, right? So.
Yeah, I think that was a great comment that, everyone has a culture, whether you know it or not, and I also like the fact that you said it needs to be, on the other side, though, it needs to be intentional and deliberate. I mean, that's something that you said. So it really begs the question, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? I know a lot of managers are going to approach creating and managing and supporting a company culture the way they manage a policy and procedure manual. That it has to be like this. Here's the steps that everybody has to take, and we've got to be trained on it. Can a business truly fabricate and grow a company culture? If it's really just the byproduct of employee engagement with the company?
It's probably, I think it's a blend. I think to assume that you as an organization or a leader can truly create a culture, the one you desire, 100% aligned as you see it and envision it, is probably too idealistic to be reality. I also think to suggest or assume that, culture is so nebulous and it's so ever evolving that you can play no part in its creation would also be too far on the other spectrum. And I think you have to appreciate your role in facilitating culture and try and put in place good structures, good guardrails, good activities that enhance the culture. And that is the role I think you can play as a leader or as a executive in an organization. Amin already mentioned one of the key activities, which is kind of the gatekeeping of culture, which is hiring, bringing someone into the organization. I think another kind of critical defining activity is promotions. I mean, talked about elevating someone, to your point of lip service or what's said. Well, nothing says this person's a role model of our culture more than taking them, promoting them, giving them additional responsibility, rewards, recognizing them. Those are the ways you can really help entrench culture. But I also think you need to accept that it's, to those who love a certain degree of control, you'll have to accept there's never going to be 100% control and ability to kind of manage it completely. You're really there as a steward to support it.
I think that's really important. You said that earlier, and that really resonated with me. That as a business owner myself, that you're a steward of what that is. And as a steward, though, you still have some responsibilities, not only to lead by example, but to recognize people, promote people that are obviously, as you talked about, highlighting those people that are supporting it and growing it. Carolina Doucette, who's watching live, just posted a question on that I thought maybe you guys could answer now. Which she asked, I'm wondering if you could share an example of one thing either of you do personally to help create or maintain that culture and vision for your company.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. I think, to Dave's point around influencing a culture, that is your role as kind of a leader, right? Influencing the direction and evolution of that culture. And I'd like to think Avanti is a great example of that, right? We acquired this business back in 2016, and we sort of set it on a new sort of strategic direction. And that involved enacting a cultural overhaul and change for the organization. And so in doing that, we did things like, understand our core purpose as an organization and define that, instill and define what our core values would be. And the things that we personally do now, 6 years later, right, is continue to repeat and entrench and elevate those core elements of the culture, right? And so how that reflects in our day-to-day is when we think about who we spotlight, who we give praise to, who we promote, we are always evaluating that against not just the dimension of performance in your job and what your accountabilities are, but also how you exhibit and embody and demonstrate our culture and how much of a role model you are, right? And so, that's kind of what we do. We reinforce it. We keep saying it till people get sick of hearing us say it, because that's when we know they're starting to really hear it and understand it, and then we try and reinforce it in terms of who we elevate within the organization.
Yeah, Sam, you used this word earlier, which I really liked, which is leaders also need to be role models of the culture you're trying to aspire to. And in some ways, I think Amin and I regularly, hold each other accountable to that kind of high bar. To give an example, I think will resonate with anyone. You often hear organizations say, hey, we want you to take breaks. We want you to take vacation. We want you to get some time off. But if your manager, your leader takes 1 day of vacation a year, and on that 1 day of vacation sends you 45 different emails, it's really hard to kind of compare the lived behavior with the spoken word. And so even on small tactical points like that, I'd love, Amin can speak a little bit to our family job framework, which I think is really powerful, but we often try and kind of, visibly live that to the organization, which will make a little more sense with some explanation, but kind of living and being the role model is a critical part of actually trying to create the culture, I think.
Yeah, and that's not an easy thing to do as business owners. You know that it's there, and you know that you want to support that infrastructure, but then business needs sometimes, or there's that conflict, I find, between the needs of your business and you wanting to move it forward and drive productivity and drive sales and drive business with that. Hold on, I have to step back. It's like past 5 o'clock. It's past 6 o'clock. I shouldn't email. I'm going to wait till tomorrow. Especially if you're an entrepreneur. I mean, I'm sure you can appreciate that. Like we're constantly driven, constantly working. It's hard sometimes to pull back.
For sure.
One of the, I was going to hold this question off, but I think it might be worthwhile to ask now. And I want to remind everybody, so thank you, Carolina, for that question. I want to remind everybody who is listening live, if you have any questions, drop it into the comments for us. But I want to ask this question now as opposed to later, because I think it's important for us to get through, because I think it'll change maybe what the next set of questions might be. And that's the pandemic and COVID that we've all had to live with the last couple of years. It's changed the nature of work, right? In more ways than one, right? And that's not what this is about. But how do you think that the COVID and the pandemic and the shift to working from home, and now the increased demand by many to bring people back, and that conflict, how does that impact company culture, and what should we be doing to kind of better manage that?
I mean, I think it has a tremendous impact on company culture, right? Again, when we think about culture, sort of the composition of the behaviors of everyone within the organization, right? A couple of things happened in the pandemic. The first was there was, what has been coined as the Great Resignation, but ultimately it was just high turnover experienced by lots of different employers. So by that very nature, your culture changes, right? Because the makeup of the people within the organization has changed more substantially than it would have otherwise, right? So I think organizations are reconciling with that sort of accelerated pace of change in the employee makeup and how that has an impact on culture. And then, of course, there's the how you show up to work part of it, right? Whereas some companies went from full in-office cultures, which was actually what Avanti was, to us embracing a distributed first work model and hiring across all of Canada. And I think it goes back to how intentional and deliberate you are about crafting your culture, and then how you connect that with the programs and the processes that you put in place to enable that. And so for us, early on in the pandemic, we made the decision to embrace what we saw was happening, the real-time change, and become that distributed first culture. And that started, flowing into who we were hiring, what we were screening for, what those people were looking for in terms of, how they will show up to work. And I think for organizations that were a little bit less deliberate, that sort of just, had the workforce change on them and reacted to it, are now sort of reconciling that, hey, we have different factions. Some people who prefer a distributed work model, some people who prefer an in-office model. And it's hard to design a workplace when there isn't that cohesion between factions of people in your company, right? And so I think now what we're seeing is a lot of creativity. It's not to suggest that it can't be solved, right? But we're seeing a lot of creativity on different work models, hybrid, couple days in office, everyone on the same days. For us, we still think in-person meetups and connections being built is critical to employee culture, to a company's culture. And so, we do things like meetups. So we bring all of our people together in one place, for example, to kick off our fiscal year. Or we're trying to, design programs that allow teams to meet up on a regular cadence, or people who live in the same geographic area to meet up on a regular basis. So anyways, apologize, a bit long-winded, but there's so much to unpack in terms of COVID and its impact on company culture. And it's really fluid at the end of the day, right? And so as leaders, what's important in our mind is that we keep culture as an important topic of discussion, and we are intentional about it and deliberate about crafting the processes to enable the culture that we want to see. I don't know, Dave, what would you add to that? I know it's a topic you and I have had many debates about, and
yeah. I would just add it's hard. Like we spend countless hours talking about it, and to say we've perfected it would be obviously wrong. I think it's a work in progress, and part of that is because I think everyone has had a taste of the benefit of flexibility from being able to work from wherever. And there's tons spoken about this, so I won't add too much other than it's obviously a great benefit, right? To be able to some days go in the office, to some days not, to go on vacation, to travel, to be somewhere else, and to still be able to maintain your productivity and job and do that well. Like those are wonderful things. And at the same time, I think it's harder to build relationships at work. I think it's harder to be new in a workforce and learn and train and pop over to someone's desk and ask them that 2-second question. I think those things are harder. And so I would say, I think it's going to be many years of working through kind of optimizing this new way of working. And we're certainly haven't solved it, but it's a fun kind of nut to crack. And I do think what we can't do is pretend that we haven't had our eyes open to how wonderful the flexibility is to be able to work on a distributed basis. And so I think trying to put everyone back and say, hey, pretend you never knew how good it could be, go back to 5 days a week, that I think that era is done. And it's going to be a long journey to kind of figure out how to make it successfully work in a distributed way.
Yeah, that's funny. It's kind of like Pandora's box. We opened it. But I might be the only person on the planet who actually prefers going into the office every day. I don't know that I believe that it is such a great thing. Yeah, I mean, there's certain advantages. You know what I mean? You wanted to, like, I'm not wearing pants right now. So that's a fantastic thing that, sure, that's comfortable maybe. Yeah. But I do.
Sam, actually... I'll tell you this, you're not alone. We hear like, honestly, you're not about the pants, but about that working in the office. Honestly, like we hear it all the time. And this goes back to, again, being intentional and deliberate. It's okay to be in an office culture, right? If that's what you're trying to build as a company, there's lots of people out there who still want that, like yourself, Sam. So actually, like, it's to each their own, right? You have to design the culture that works for your business and what you are trying to accomplish as a leadership team. And for many, that absolutely includes going back into the office. I think, notable headlines on big companies doing stuff like that too, right? Yeah. And so certainly, again, it goes back to, like, ideally in that circumstance, if that's really what you want as a company, you've hired people who also want that, right? And that goes into that collective behavior, makes it much easier to enable that culture if you've built it intentionally.
Yeah, and I think that intentionality is important, because the reality is the majority of us have employees that were here before and were hired under one premise, and then, like, I know myself, half my team was hired recently through the pandemic. So they've only ever known they've never known working in an office. So it becomes difficult, but that actually brings up another question for me. 2 weeks ago in our last session, we were talking to Jan Wenderhoeven from Fit First Technologies. And one of the conversations we were having there about is hiring people, and how do you hire people, and fit versus experience, or fit versus resume. It seems to me that if you need to understand your company culture, and I know this is something we do with some success, is we know what our company culture is. We don't dictate it. We keep asking our staff, so tell us, what's our company culture? What do you guys see it as? And that kind of helps us inform what they like and how they want to work. And we then just try and support that. But when we hire people, we ask a lot of questions around the type of work environment that they like to be in. What motivates them? What perks do they like to see? And we have a tendency to hire for culture first. And in some cases, we hired people who didn't necessarily have the best skills on their resume in comparison to, their peers that we were interviewing, but we hired them because their cultural fit was stronger. The skills we can train, the knowledge we can impart upon them. that cultural fit is really hard because a lot of us are ingrained into certain ways of working and certain expectations. Have you guys had any experience with that one way or the other in your hiring practices?
You want to take that?
Sure. Yeah. And I absolutely. I mean, well said, Sam. I think, touched on this a little earlier, but that is almost the recruiting and hiring process is kind of the gatekeeping to your culture. The more folks you bring in that are aligned with the values you're trying to espouse, like that's kind of how you can enhance or hurt it. And I think to your point, sometimes you might find a candidate with a fantastic resume on paper, absolutely wonderful skill set and alignment in terms of what you need in the role, and just totally be a misfit for your culture. And that can be really damaging. So absolutely, we're super thoughtful about it. You have to be quite considerate and in kind of exploring that match between what you're looking for. And I also think, to your point, I love what you said, which is skills can be taught, subject matter can be taught. I think there's always a balance of, how much are you expecting of someone you hire into the role versus where's their current skill set and how much are you willing to work with them. And typically, I would say rarely have we seen instances where we've really regretted, call it hiring the right person who we haven't been able to train. Whereas at the same time, I can think of mistakes we've made where I think we have overweighted skills, expertise in an area, and they haven't been the right cultural fit. And that's come back to bite us because, to your point, the education, training, coaching is the responsibility of an organization. And it's much harder to actually teach and train culture.
Funny story, at the start of COVID, and when we all started working from home, mandated having to work from home, we hired somebody who we didn't ask the question, but didn't want to be on video. Had some policy around, no, I don't put myself on video for any reason. It's like, well, she lasted a day with us because she couldn't collaborate. If she wouldn't get on screen, we were struggling with how do we continue to build a company culture when you can't see each other face to face. It's bad enough that you're not physically engaging in an organic, dynamic fashion in the office. If you're not going to be able to be on screen, then there's no chance. At least here, there's it's one dimensional maybe, but it's something, right? So it's interesting, the new dynamics that we have to deal with.
I actually think that's a fantastic example for anyone out there who can think of their own organization. To me, that is a often unspoken but clearly cultural expectation. I have friends in organizations who 50% of the team members will join a meeting off camera. At Avanti, unspoken expectation is typically that you are always on camera. And I have some friends who work at companies where 0% of the team members are on camera. And rarely is that a written policy or something that's been said. It's often that's that unspoken, just the way that everyone operates. And I always find that even if I have to go off camera for 2 minutes and grab a bite, I'm like, oh, I feel out of the norm. I want to get back to on camera because I know the rest of my team members are there. And anyways, it's often unspoken, but I think it's a good, clear example a lot of people can resonate with.
I think that goes into what is that company culture that you have or you're trying to foster. And if you're in a more creative environment like we are, that works. That feeding off of people's emotions that you can see on their face is part of that creative process that we've discovered that cannot be duplicated on the telephone, on a traditional conference call.
Mm-hmm. To me, it's not binary either, right? Look, it really depends on the meeting. For example, our all hands company meeting that we do weekly, not everyone's on video. It's probably 15 to 20. That's, the expectation. I'm sure in some team meetings, if that's more comfortable, like Zoom fatigue is something that's real. That's come out of a distributed work model. I've experienced that personally. And so, there's tips and tricks that we share on how to deal with that. And then at the same time, because the work model is new, we're still going to discover things that we like and dislike about the model. And we're going to have to continue to be flexible in sort of how people show up to work, right? And the same could be said for an introvert who shows up to a meeting full of extroverts where everyone's talking and they have a hard time coming in, right? And interjecting their perspective. Is that really that different than the one person who's got their camera off, who doesn't feel comfortable, right? And so again, it's like how you design a thoughtful culture to include those perspectives and hear those things. And if that means you do, one meeting every month where it's everyone's off cam, then great, right? Like that probably makes that person feel great. And so again, like it's going to be living and breathing and changing, over time. And that's where, again, like it's got to be a routine evaluation, right? Your processes that we talk about, the intentionality that it underpins it. It's not something it's once and done. Something that has to be sort of revisited frequently.
Yeah, man. I think that goes back to Dave's comment of evolving. It's something that has to evolve, and that as managers, we need to learn how to roll with those punches, and sometimes, let the group rule, dictate. I heard somebody recently say that this on-camera, off-camera thing is a matter of inclusivity. Is that if you're forcing people to be on camera all the time or not or whatever, some people just aren't physically comfortable with it for whatever that reason happens to be, because of their background, because of where they are, whatever the reason is then all of a sudden you're creating an environment that isn't as inclusive anymore. So it opens up this huge can of worms that we're all having to deal with now.
Totally.
I'm looking at the Javid's comment out in Victoria, BC, says he's listening in on LinkedIn Live. I also want to be back in the office and meet my colleagues. I agree with you, Javid. If you're ever, I'm in Toronto. If you need a job, come out here, because I'm trying to encourage everybody to come back into the office. We'll hire you. I mean, you a couple of times now have talked about this distributed first model.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people are probably very unfamiliar with that when it comes to your designing your hiring practices and your corporate culture. Can you talk a little bit about that, and how is it different than like a hybrid work model?
Totally. So I'll start with the first part of distributed first, which is the word distributed. Again, that's an intentionally chosen word instead of remote, which is what you might hear mostly used. Remote to us implies there's a center of gravity, and those who are not in that center of gravity are remote to that. And we, again, coming from a place of being a principally in-office culture, mostly concentrated in Calgary, Alberta, wanted to be cognizant of, by going to a distributed model, it's not, hey, you're either in Calgary or you're remote, but that we're designing a culture that considers us all remote, aka distributed across the country first. And so what that means to us is the sort of your regular day-to-day, the way you show up to work, is working from where you're comfortable. And so that can be, for most people, from home. It could be from a coffee shop. It could be from a shared office space. It could be from our office that we still have in Calgary, and we're evaluating how we want to deploy our physical spaces too. But distributed, right? We're all sort of coming in through our computers, and it's sort of leveling the playing field in terms of how we show up to work day to day. And then, the hybrid piece for us is complementing, acknowledging what Javid said, right? Like we also want to meet our colleagues and have fun and, brainstorm together and go out for drinks and dinners and stuff like that too. And so, that's where we want to have sort of a meetup strategy, right? Where it's a certain cadence for the whole company, teams can meet up together, and then people in sort of regional concentrations and in sort of cities can meet up together on a regular cadence. I think outside of Avanti, right, hybrid can mean we have in-office and work from home options. I've seen some people do, hey, everyone has to be sort of in the office on these days, and then you can be sort of distributed on other days. I've seen it as you choose your days. And I think there's some challenges there, right? Of how do you integrate the physical workplace with the distributed workplace? And that's really hard. If you've ever been the one Zoom participant in a meeting where everyone else is live and in a room, it's incredibly difficult to participate in that type of meeting. And so, that's a challenge that organizations who have chosen to pursue that type of flexibility of in-office and hybrid and or distributed, like how to reconcile that is going to be an interesting challenge that employers will have to work through.
I think there's also one of the things that we've noticed, and I've been hearing people talking about within the community on the 17thfloor.com, is that when you're in a meeting of 10 people and you're in your boardroom and there's 2 or 3 very active people, and some people are just listening and they're more introverted, they like to think before they speak, right? Which is nothing wrong with that. That's just their method of communication. It's not as noticeable. But when you've got 10 people on a video screen and there's 3 people who don't say anything, or just standing there staring, for some, it's almost like a light is being shined on them. That doesn't happen inside of a boardroom when there's 2 or 3 people that aren't engaging quite as much. So I find that that's a really interesting dynamic that we're going to have to get used to.
You don't usually have all the view of all 10 people all at once, right? Which is what Zoom enables you to do, right?
Yeah.
So it's a different kind of interactive experience, if you will. And look, to play devil's advocate to that, Sam, there's also interesting ways for those same introverted folks who want to think before they speak to now engage in the meeting in a different way by dropping something into the chat, which you can't really do that in a physical room, or, give someone a thumbs up. That's a little weirder to do live than it is to just pop one onto your screen, right? Or a clap.
Great point.
Or an emoji, right? So, I think there's, again, pros and cons, and it's not going to work perfectly for everyone. And that's where it's like, I love what you said, Sam. It's you got to routinely talk to your people and ask them how the culture is working for them, because they are the key stakeholders. We don't design the culture for us to feel good about ourselves that we have the culture. It's so that our employees can accomplish greatness together in the most productive and effective way, right? And so they need to be a stakeholder in that discussion and what we design for them.
I always have, I'm fascinated by this subject and just this whole Zoom meeting thing, because I've even heard some people say that they're always smiling because you never know when someone's taking a screen capture, and they don't want to have that resting bitch face, is what she said to me. She goes, so she's always trying to be up just in case somebody's taking a screen capture or something, or a video.
That'd be hard. That's hard on someone, right?
That's draining.
From your personal just way you are, that's really hard.
Yeah, being in a room with a group of people is one thing, but being on screen, even if you're not presenting, you're still on camera. There's a focus on you that doesn't make a lot of people comfortable.
Well, you have a constant mirror, which is unusual, right? It's not like being in the room where, you don't have to stare at yourself and see how you are looking, see how it looks when you speak in every moment, which is just not necessarily natural.
Yeah. If for any viewers, I would tell you, try turning off your self view for a day. You will feel less energy drain.
Yeah.
It's human nature, right? You see yourself, you look at yourself, start to judge yourself. Get rid of that. Turn off your self view.
Yeah.
So that makes me think of something, though, because now there's this shift because of all of this as managers. It seems to me that if we're going to allow this extra flexibility of working from home, if that's going to be part of this company culture that we're allowing, we need to start shifting from a task-oriented job description. So, you got to get these things done in a day, to a goal-oriented organization, where as long as you get your job done, I don't care if you get it done from home or from Starbucks, or the office, or if you start at 10 or 11, because now at home, I don't know when you start. So I'm just trusting you that this is the job you're going to get done by the end of the week, not that you've put in X number of hours in a particular day. That's putting a lot of trust in the staff. But it's got to be something so difficult for management to make that transition. How have you guys handled that shift of just enabling that trust, or allowing yourselves to trust people that the job's going to get done regardless of when they show up or not?
This is so first of all, long before moving to any type of distributed work, hearkening back to, when I started at Avanti, 5 days a week, very office-centric culture. Even back then, we spoke a lot about context over control. And that was in some ways almost a framework, a mindset that we tried to embody, way before it had anything to do with where you worked or how much observation a manager might have. And in some ways that has only, I would say, enhanced or continued to be an important part of how we design in our minds culture in a distributed world. The reality is, I also always laugh a little bit on this topic. There's lots of people who can sit at a desk 5 days a week and, find themselves busy on things that may not necessarily be the list of tasks you hope or want them to be working on. So I would say it's definitely a challenge. You're right that it is requires trust. I think it requires support too. One of the tough parts, I think, of being an employee working in that regard is when you're stuck, when you're trying to work on a bigger objective and you don't have that kind of obvious next specific task, it can be a little trickier when you're sitting at home alone trying to figure it out. So it's a bit of a long-winded way of saying, I think the framework of providing context and support over control is something we've tried to live for a long time. It doesn't make it easier when you don't have that close physical proximity, but it also isn't a total kind of transition or change from some of how we used to work as well. And I think overall it's a good thing if you can be in a position where you can share with someone, here's what is important, here is why it's important, and they have some autonomy to figure out how they accomplish that goal. That's also pretty cool and allows for creativity and is motivating and can be fun. So there's definitely some positive aspects to it, despite it maybe being a little trickier than just stipulating a list of tasks.
I just noticed Javed commented back. Thanks, Javed. I think he's just politely trying to say, yeah, I'm not coming back to Toronto. That was his polite way of saying, yeah, thank you, but no, thank you. All right. It's my last, Javed. Katie just made a comment. I love this webinar. The HR specialist in me from Quebec, Canada is drinking in every word. Well, there you go. Look at that. We're happy that you joined us, Katie. I'm always loving these conversations that we have on the 17th floor because we are pulling in people from BC, Quebec, Ontario, Calgary, Edmonton. We got people from all over the place, which is really nice and shows that this is very much a universal issue right now that we're all having to face here in Canada. We're coming close to our time here, so I'd like to ask one more thought from you guys before we try and wrap it up. And that what mistakes, if you guys can go back and just think about the managers that are out there and business owners that are listening to us, if you can pinpoint a mistake that you've made in this transition and the growth of your culture in this business of yours, what would that be?
I got one off the top of my head. I mean, we could probably each share a couple because one thing I'd say, Sam, I mentioned this earlier, it is a work in progress. I think it's good to acknowledge that up front. I think one of the things I think we try and do well is acknowledge that we're going to screw a bunch of stuff up on this journey, this cultural journey. And so regularly solicit feedback on how we can make it better. So I think that's a good starting place. With that said, I'll tell you, fundamentally, at a high level, I think the biggest mistake or theme of mistakes we've made culturally over time is designing programs that didn't meet the company culture where it was at that time. So let me give you a kind of specific example. I can think about 5 years ago, we created a performance management program. It was very comprehensive. It was called the balanced scorecard approach. Some of you may be familiar with. And I would actually say within a box, it was actually a fantastic program. It was very well thought out. It was excellent. It was comprehensive. The problem is it did not align with where the organization was. So we hadn't really built that feedback culture. We hadn't coached, trained managers on how to think about performance, how to measure it. And so in some ways we designed a wonderful program, but that program wasn't quite fit for where we were at as an organization. And I think that's a good example and reminder that, you can come up with some amazing things, and you'll often hear, I think sometimes you'll hear an example of something Apple does or Netflix, and you might want to say, wow, that's cool. We should do that too. But the reality is that program, that one example you hear might fit in the overall ecosystem of their culture, and trying to cherry pick that single example and input it into your culture doesn't always work the way either it's intended or as well as you'd hope. So definitely lots of mistakes over the years, but fundamentally that's probably the theme of it is you got to meet the program and the culture at where they're both at.
Yeah, love that. That's a really salient observation, Dave. I would say, Sam, I can't believe you saved that for the last question. We could have a whole other conversation about mistakes we've made.
Pick one.
I'll tell you this. I'll tell you one thing we've done right with our mistakes is we have asked our employees for honest feedback. We have laid bare the results of those feedback, of that feedback. We have been held ourselves accountable to where we've erred in acknowledging that. And we have designed programs in response to that feedback. And then we try and circle back and talk about the impact to reinforce like why we want feedback. So truly, mistakes, I think, Dave, you mentioned it, they're part of this. You're never going to get it perfect. So reconcile with that and learn to use your mistakes as the guide to how to optimize going forward. And I think that's one thing we've done well with the litany of mistakes that we've made along the way.
Yeah, well, you're not the only ones. We've certainly made our share here, and I'll throw one in from my perspective. When we first went to an at-work model, at-home work model, because we were mandated a couple of years ago to do so, we had a very dynamic environment in our office. There wasn't many of us at the time, and we were growing. And one of the things that we wanted to try and continue that dynamic and that relationship building that we had and the fun that we used to have. And so we used to have like a 1 hour social thing every Thursday, and we decided to do it via Zoom instead. And we made it a policy that you had to participate and a policy that you had to come on and have fun. That's the policy. You got to come and have fun. And so, we forced everybody to kind of throw in, we would ask questions. We did all of the, it's like the old, in my MBA course, they taught me how to do this, and to Dave's point, that doesn't mean it's going to work in your particular organization because it worked for somebody in the 70s. That was something that we struggled with. We forced people to participate and to try and have fun and to replicate an in-office experience online, and the two just don't marry up. And you have to let that evolve, which we finally figured out a little bit of a mix of how to do. But
we're smiling because we made the same mistake.
Yeah,
so.
Not the only ones.
It's part of your job description to join and have fun and smile and laugh. And laugh at all of my jokes, which is kind of still an unspoken rule, by the way, in my company. Why don't I give you guys an opportunity? We talked a lot about this. Is there any final thoughts that you had in your head that you were hoping to get out that I did not ask?
There's one thing I thought about after at the intro I didn't say, and I think is something we've learned over time, which is that there isn't necessarily, we often talk about cultures in the essence of there is good culture and there is bad culture. And I actually think that's misguided. There is the right culture for the right set of people at the right time. And some, what works for one individual may be totally inappropriate for another. And what I mean by that is, while there are some things that that you see common across many organizations, the reality is some people are a fantastic fit at one organization at a given time and may not be at another. And that's okay. It's not about right or wrong, good or bad. It's about the right culture for the right people at the right time.
Yeah.
Maybe the only thing I would add to that is organizations that care about this stuff sort of kind of, the proverbial put your money where your mouth is. And I just want to give a huge amount of credit to our people team, led by Lindsay Gregoire. She and her squad, they invest a ton of time and energy in being intentional and deliberate. And I think organizations that really care about their people and culture will invest in those groups. They see them as strategic, as, creating value across the organization by enabling everyone to be the best version of themselves. And, I think we wouldn't be anywhere without them. And at the same time, as you look to design, that culture, don't underestimate that it does take investment in doing those things. And doing that intentionally and deliberately is also really important. So having the right folks on your people or HR team is super important.
It is very important, and takes a lot of culture. It takes a lot of courage by managers and owners of companies to make that investment, and because it's not a by the books thing the way that the MBA courses have taught.
You're talking to ex-finance guys who can put the ROI model against that. It's a little bit tangible, right? But it's it's one of those things where the ROI is immeasurably positive. So even though you can't really quantify it, it's spend worth spending for sure.
I love that phrase. ROI is immeasurably positive. I'm going to use that on every sales pitch I have from here on in. Well, I'm really happy to have had you guys as our subject matter experts here. You know, I mean, I know that your business is not creating company cultures, but it is certainly about driving productivity with the Avanti payroll software that you guys have. So why don't you guys tell everybody a little bit about your company and what you do? Because I'm sure people are curious now after this great culture that we just talked about.
Sure. Would love to do that. And, you know, should have mentioned too, it really is an honor to be part of this community. I think it's been a distinct pleasure of both of ours of getting to know some of the members and, you know, through the 17th floor, through National Payroll Weeks, through the MPI conferences. It really is, there's a lot to be said about kind of the communal atmosphere and kind of support for one another that's exemplified between payroll, HR, accounting professionals. It's pretty cool to be a part of this. You know, Avanti is really an expert in payroll and workforce management, time and attendance, sometimes called, scheduling, sometimes called, as well as providing HR and recruiting solutions through an all-in-one system. We really, I think, differentiate in terms of how we support our clients. We aren't the big, you know, public, global, multinational enterprises. We are Canadian through and through. Every single one of our employees is here in Canada. We are very specific and intentional about the organizations we support, which are mid-market enterprises in Canada. And when you think about our solution, that is a big part of it, right? You know, we talked a lot today about culture. It's not just the product and how you use it. It's the team that supports you in setting it up, in training you, in supporting you and caring for you when something's going wrong, when you want to run a really comprehensive, crazy report that the CFO asked for at the last minute. Like we're there, we're the solution, we're the team to help you get through it. I think we pride ourselves in that. I don't know if there's anything else you'd add, Amin.
No, I think, again, you know, the theme of intentional and deliberate has come through a lot today, and that's true on who we are and who we serve. We really care about our market and work hard to help save time, energy, and alleviate problems from their lives through our technology. And, you know, to get in contact with us, you can go to our website, avanti.ca. There's a Let's Talk button right at the top. Give us a follow on LinkedIn, and we'd love for you to hear from you on any of our posts. And, you know, as you heard the passion come through today, we love talking about company culture. It's something we care about a lot, you know, at Avanti, and always happy to engage in that conversation, whether it's here or in a follow-up in the future.
Well, thanks, Dave, Amin, and to your team who helped get all of this together. Really appreciate your insights into how you're developing, managing, growing your company culture. It is, again, right in line with a lot of the things we talk about here on the 17th floor, and certainly something that impacts all the disciplines that come together on this platform, HR, payroll, accounting. And it is all about human capital management. And it seems like it's just the right community at the right time for everything that's happening in our workforce right now and how we're all working. For those of you that are, again, listening to this playback, don't hesitate to please leave a comment. This is an ongoing conversation. This is not a one and done. For those of you watching live, it will be posted in our community for members to play back, or you're listening on our podcast. Reminder, we're here every couple of weeks, every second Wednesday specifically, where we do this at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, always with some different experts. I wouldn't mind maybe catching up with you two in a year from now to see what changes have been made based on how the economy and our work environment is changing.
Would love that.
Getting in the calendar.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll see you on the 17th floor.
Thanks,
yeah.